Let's jump right in. We're currently watching the global landscape shift at lightning speed. And right at the center of it all is India's External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, who just launched a massive new diplomatic push in New York. In this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly what India is pitching for, a UN Security Council seat for the 2028 to 2029 term. And, maybe more importantly, we'll dig into the deeply rooted history they're bringing to the table to justify their demand for a permanent voice on the global stage. But first, we really have to ask the big question driving all of this. Why is a nation that has already served 8 previous terms on the Security Council launching such an aggressive, highly structured campaign right now? Like, what exactly has shifted in the geopolitical tectonic plates that makes this specific bid so absolutely critical for New Delhi, and really for the broader global South? Here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The 2028 to 2029 campaign. 2. A founding UN member. 3. Trailblazing Indian women. 4. UN peacekeeping powerhouse. And 5. The SHANTI and Manal frameworks. Section 1. The 2028 to 2029 UNSC campaign. The pitch for the Global South. Now, what's super fascinating here is that India is already a total veteran of the UN horseshoe table. I mean, they most recently served in the 2021 to 2022 terms, so heading into next June's election against Tajikistan, they aren't coming in as rookies. They are seasoned players, which actually makes their current push for a structural reform of the council itself just way more impactful. The core point India is making here, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi really hammers this home, is that this 15-nation council, founded way back in 1945, simply does not reflect today's geopolitical reality. They're arguing, and quite forcefully, that a system designed over 3/4 of a century ago is just no longer fit for purpose. If you only expand the non-permanent seats without touching the permanent power structure, well, that basically borders on failure. They're demanding that the voices of developing nations be heard in equal measure. Section 2. A founding UN member. Deep historical roots. To really get what backs up this bid, we have to rewind a bit. India's involvement goes all the way back to the very beginning. Look at 1942. Even before their own independence, they signed the Declaration by United Nations in D.C. By 1945, they were right there at the San Francisco Conference, literally helping to create the UN. Fast forward to 1953, and India's Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit makes history as the very first woman elected president of the UN General Assembly. So they aren't just members, they are literally architects of this international organization. And during those really tumultuous early years, India definitely didn't just sit quietly on the sidelines. Way back in 1946, they were the very first country to step up and raise the issue of apartheid in South Africa at the UN. They also co-sponsored the landmark 1960 declaration demanding an end to colonialism, and they were elected the first chair of the Decolonization Committee. They really used their platform early on to be an outspoken, leading critic of racial discrimination and colonial rule. Section 3. Trailblazing Indian women, shaping universal human rights. Okay, this is a really cool historical vignette. Back when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was being drafted in the late 40s, the original text echoed older documents, saying all men are created equal. But an Indian delegate, Mrs. Hansa Mehta, actually pushed back on that. She was the one responsible for getting that specific language changed to all human beings, which ensured that gender equality was explicitly baked into the foundational text of international human rights law. And building right on that, another incredible Indian delegate, Mrs. Lakshmi Menon, fiercely championed this exact idea of universality in 1948. She argued that if women and people living under colonial rule weren't explicitly called out as having equal rights, they'd just be conveniently excluded whenever the world talked about everyone. It's just a stark reminder of how precise diplomatic wording literally shapes our reality, and how hard these early Indian representatives fought for true inclusivity. Section 4. UN Peacekeeping Powerhouse, a legacy of boots on the ground. 300,000. Just let that staggeringly huge number sink in for a second. That is the amount of Indian personnel deployed to roughly 50 UN peacekeeping missions over the decades. It's a massive legacy of boots on the ground. When we talk about India's commitment to international security, it is not just theoretical. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people deployed to some of the most volatile regions on Earth to help maintain stability. Now, connecting this back to their legacy of female representation, the UN actually has a gender parity strategy. The goal is to hit 25% female representation for staff officers and observers by 2028.
Well, India is already incredibly close. They're sitting right at 22% and proactively working to close that tiny 3% gap well ahead of the global deadline.
And they've hit some really pioneering milestones along the way. In the 1960s, they deployed women from their armed forces medical services to the Congo. Then, in 2007, they made global headlines by sending the very first all-women formed police unit to Liberia, a deployment that lasted nearly a decade and was hugely praised. And just recently, in February 2025, New Delhi hosted a major conference specifically aimed at enhancing training for women peacekeepers from the global south. Section 5. The Shanti and Mana Frameworks. The pitch for the future. So, how does this rich history translate into their modern pitch? It really boils down to two core frameworks that Jaishankar presented. First is Shanti, which means peace. It stands for Securing Holistic Advancement Through Norms, Trust, and Integrity. This is their foundational approach to the UN. It's a vision for a secure, equitable world where multilateralism actually fixes things, where our maritime lifelines are kept safe, and where terrorism is actively choked off from the resources that feed it. Right alongside Shanti is the Manav framework. This one is all about addressing the new frontier of global security, emerging tech. Manav is India's human-centric approach to artificial intelligence. As the whole world is trying to figure out AI governance, India is pitching a model built on moral systems, accountable governance, and national sovereignty. The whole idea is to make sure we get all the massive benefits of AI while putting up strict guardrails against its misuse. But India doesn't just leave these as high-level buzzwords. They ground them in concrete action. They point to humanitarian and disaster relief across 79 different countries. They highlight their intense anti-piracy operations in the Indian Ocean. They remind everyone that during their G20 presidency, they were the ones who pushed to get the African Union permanent admission, and they point to their ongoing developmental support, like recent healthcare commitments to Palestine. Through all this, India is positioning itself as a vital bridge between the developed world and the rising global south. Which brings us right to the core issue we all need to be watching. As the global order shifts faster than ever and developing nations demand a real seat at the table, that old 1945 status quo is under immense pressure. So how will the rise of the global south, driven by nations with the sheer scale and deep UN history of India, permanently reshape the future of the Security Council? We're going to leave you with that provocative thought to chew on as we watch the inevitable evolution of global governance. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.